Welcome everybody, education and skills. So in your pack you will have three feedback sheets. The one that we're going to be focusing on right now is the one in blue, yes. So on the back of that, and you'll probably be used to this already, is the SWOT analysis that's been undertaken that directly links to education and skills. So we're... do we have to... Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, we're going to do a bit of a...
You first.
No, I'm not going to do that. So, education skills, SWOT analysis. Hopefully you've got that in front of you. Now, we're going to utilise that in the next 30 minutes to focus and answer our questions. So, I guess very similar sort of process than the one that you just went to, but on a slightly different subject. So, our first question relates to the SWOT and particularly the findings of the task force and whether you feel that there are any gaps. Now, I know that there's a fair bit of information there to sort of absorb in a very short space of time. But from our perspective, we really want to hear what your perspectives are in relation to that gap. So any sort of immediate thoughts, anything that you sort of feel that is glaringly obviously not either in the SWOT or the findings from the task force.
And we're talking about skills and pathways, obviously, from skills, the educational sector, right through to employers and employment. So how does that link? How does that work together? A lot of conversation from the previous group around that. So really your thoughts as to how we take that forward.
Stunned silence. So please tell us we're not going to have to do a dance of some description to get you to say something, because that could be awkward. We've not rehearsed anything. So... what do we think the gaps are? In the previous room, we were talking about the ecosystem. So with training providers, and obviously I represent a university, but we are not great at that sort of integrated supply chain. So is that a problem for employers? Question mark. Is that a gap? So I'm interested to sort of hear your thoughts about how does it work in practice for you? Because we do what we do, you know, we offer degree programs and master's level programs, and some of that will enable the individuals that work with you to have those higher level skills. But we also know that individuals in this county with those higher level skills go outside of the county and take those skills with them. So how does that impact on what you do and what you need in relation to skills? That's what we're interested in, isn't it, today?
As employers, you know, I recognise a couple of faces from business boards and other groups I'm on. How does that impact on you and employers in terms of retaining your staff and being able to deliver your business? Hiya.
Sorry, you just need the mic so people online can hear you.
I'll give you some feedback that may not be that helpful, but I'm only a small employee. We've got a dozen people, but we're growing pretty quickly, so we're doing a lot of recruiting. Yeah. We don't care where people are anymore. No. I've got somebody working for me from New York, London, Brighton, Pembrokeshire. What we do try and employ locally, but we are quite specialist, so we're a digital startup, so we're looking for specific programmers. Yeah. The one thing we notice, we're paying an awful lot for them, and that's just part of the course, really. But so I can't give you a sort of, this is a traditional local business, this is where the gaps are. What we have noticed when we are recruiting, though, is that it seems that there are more graduates who are staying in the area, because why move to London and pay, or they can't even afford to pay the rent anyway. Yeah. So we are seeing more local people trying to either be freelancers or set up their own little business, and that seems to be running well. And I'm amazed that, you know, we're recruiting for some designers at the moment, that there's a lot of people who are actually gaining business through their Instagram accounts and stuff. Yeah. It's a different way anymore. Yeah. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, because we're not seeing the gaps, because we're not restricted.
No, but it is helpful though, isn't it? Because we know in this county that 90.5 was it of employers have got 10 staff or less.
Yes.
So if those 10 staff aren't from the county, then that is helpful, isn't it? To know that, because how do we then generate that start-up within the county to create opportunity within the county.
Yeah. But is that old data as well? Because, I mean, I remember when I was doing some research 4 or 5 years ago, that was the case. I'm wondering if that may actually be changing now.
Yeah.
Because historically, when you're growing, because there's loads of small businesses, aren't there, as you say, it's under 6 or whatever it is, and then they disappear.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether that may actually be changing, and maybe look at the data in a year's time to see if it's different.
Yeah, and certainly from the data that we have, we know we've got a slightly lower start-up rate than the UK, and a slightly higher, if I remember rightly, maintenance of those businesses. So I just wonder whether, from a skills perspective, how that is working and operationalising in relation to upskill, reskill, and making sure that you've got the workforce that you need. Because, as I say, it's that whole skills infrastructure, isn't it? It's not just the university, it's FE, it's private training providers. Yeah. How do you know what you need from a skills perspective, and how do you know where to get it from? I think that's a challenge. Sorry.
No, you are right, that is a challenge, but actually I was just wanting to go back to that slide and the gaps. Until very recently, I was, a medium-sized employer. I had 140 odd staff. Our biggest issue is actually with young people coming through who don't have the basic skills in numeracy and literacy, and don't know what's expected still from employers, despite doing lots of work placements, going into schools and FE, trying to talk to young people. Yeah. But I think supported pathways, absolutely. We need to be able to upskill our workforce, and we need to be able to reward them. But I do think still the gap, and I know I'm actually the chair of the Local Enterprise Partnership, so I know about the Careers and Enterprise Company. I know what's out there, but we're still not reaching enough employers to work with young people and to get people used to the different ways of working. It's not about necessarily 9 till 5 or 8 till 4, but we do need to have that better link, as every employer should be, in my opinion, working with their local schools, colleges, to really get that, what happens in work. Yeah. And, that's part. So what we're talking here is post-school. Yes. We still have too many young people who are leaving school demotivated and unaware of the incredible opportunities that we have here in the county.
And I guess alongside that, knowing and understanding that they can create those opportunities for themselves, because we know that this, as a county, we've got a really high level of SME micro business. Yeah. So actually, to engage young people into doing that for themselves, as well as getting the skills to work with others.
We need to make business, we need to make the world of work interesting, exciting, because actually for those of us who are entrepreneurs in the audience, it is incredibly exciting. Yeah. It's also can be really frustrating, but it is exciting, and there are huge opportunities, particularly in this county, where you can do a job and you can be on a Zoom or Teams call with people in New York or London or Pembrokeshire or wherever, but you're creating wealth. The money you're earning is going back into the local economy. But we still have this gap with young people not knowing the opportunities or not realising the opportunities. And I think that's the bit, and I think that's a real role for business to go out there and speak to, even from primary upwards, work is fun.
Yeah. And so how do we facilitate that?
How do we make that happen? Because that was something that the previous group identified as well, that disconnect between employers and people leaving school, having a framework and network in place, a strategy in place to remedy that. So what is the answer, I guess?
How do you see that happening? I mean, obviously you've got business here.
I mean, just on that front, the whole work experience thing. In our office, I work for Cooper Green Pooks. We're a firm of property consultants, and every so often we'll have whether it's a sixth form or a GCSE student, they'll come to us and ask whether they can come for a week's work experience, which is fine, but that probably happens maybe once or twice a year. Yeah. I just don't know whether it's up to maybe the colleges and the schools to perhaps go to the local business community and ask, look, are you willing to give up a month a year for our students to come for work experience, rather than leave it to the students to effectively go out and find somewhere to get that work experience. I don't know how many people in this room would offer the opportunity for those students to have that experience.
I think you'd be surprised. I think a lot of employers in Shropshire would, because the experience of being here is a lot of employers in Shropshire are proactive and would back that type of approach. I think you know we'd get a lot of interest in that.
One of the challenges from the previous room, and I think we need to move on to the next question. I
Yeah,
don't know if there's a
excuse
button
me.
on the podium to press. Yeah. Thank you. But in relation to opportunities, particularly, in the previous room we were talking about that infrastructure. So there's a will, obviously, because at least 2 individuals in this room alone have described that. But how do we facilitate it? Whose responsibility is it to try to do that? Because the more we push that onto somebody else and don't take that on ourselves, the less likely it is to happen. So how do we create that in this county? How would we do that? Anybody got any sort of thoughts about, is it a different network? Is it utilising an existing network in a different way? What could we do together to facilitate that, if that's a significant challenge? And I think we've recognised that it is.
I mean, is there anything locally, any pressure locally from businesses, from the council, on the colleges and the universities to tailor courses to what are growing sectors in Shropshire, for example? Or do the colleges and the universities just look at the national picture?
I mean,
Well,
I can talk to that from,
as in
I can talk from an employment
experience.
sector.
So you talk about
You
it
hear
from your
lots about
perspective,
agri-tech
and then I'll
being
tell you-
important and economic, renewable energies, etc. in
Yeah, yeah.
Shropshire being a growth area for those sectors.
Yeah.
Is that translating to what we're teaching our young children?
I think there's a huge opportunity, and I can only speak from the position I hold at DWP, where green jobs and green industry is a huge opportunity for us in Shropshire. But I think there's a need for, again, a strategic framework to be linked up and for funding to be set aside to create and train people for the jobs of tomorrow, retrain people who have lost work during COVID, who have a transferable skills. But there's an opportunity only if we move quickly. You know, we're talking of a 5-year plan here as a task force from 2022 to 2027, and the opportunity is there now if the key players move and work together, take shared responsibility. That's from the employment end. Kirsty, I'm sure from the skills.
So from our perspective as a university, and it will be slightly different for different universities, but from our perspective, we absolutely want our programmes not just to be about training an individual for a particular role, but also training them and giving them the knowledge and skills to transfer that to different roles should they wish to undertake them. So what we would want to do, and in any new programme that we develop, we have to have external advisement from the industry, whichever industry it happens to be. So programmes like our nursing programmes, for example, are heavily regulated. So there's no real issue with those types of programmes. It's the programmes that I'm involved with. So from a business school's perspective, business management, what does that mean, really? So you've got the functions of management, which we would talk about on a programme, but that's not necessarily going to develop a young person to set up their own business, because they're oriented around theoretical constructs. So how do we enable, then, that student to see what real life's like? Well, we do that through assessment. So, for example, on our business management programme, we have Iceland, who sets students a task, and then students in groups present those challenges, I suppose, back to Iceland for Iceland to implement those that they feel they could or want to. So authentic assessment is one way, but that's after the horse is bolted, in a sense. It's about course development and delivery, not about course, the writing of the course, the establishment of the course in the first place. So we've got to look at local, regional trends in terms of what contribution we can make, but they change, and it takes us up to 2 years to get from writing a degree to delivering a degree. So we need to rely on you to tell us what you think you need in 2 to 3 to 5 years' time for us to be able to then write a programme that provides you with the employees that you need in that. So the whole thing's interconnected. Sorry, there's two questions. He's got the mic, he's got the power. So you'll have to pass it to you.
Thank you. People in the room will have heard me make a similar point in the last session, but just, I mean, firstly on tapping into the boomerangers, the people who've come back to Shropshire, who've got themselves a degree, who are struggling. You know, is there a piece of work that could be done to actually just put them in a room and say, and bring in employers and bring in the opportunity, to talk about what are the opportunities for graduates who have come back to Shropshire, who maybe decided not to stay in the city where their university was, because there are loads of them. I just know that from personal experience.
Yeah.
The second one is just to do with the education sector at the moment. So I'm currently Mayor of Shrewsbury. I was at the HE Awards for Shrewsbury College. I ended up having a chat to some people who are getting their qualifications in construction. About 5 or 6 of them. Only one of them knew the word retrofit.
Yeah.
That was somewhat of a shock for me. And the third thing is just in terms of the network. So I'm hearing about UCS and the college. I'm just wondering where Harper Adams is in this story, because they seem to be so important and they're doing innovative stuff around modernising a sustainable agriculture. And are they being pulled in? I heard somebody, for example, make a very interesting suggestion that when we think about what happens to Shire Hall, that perhaps Harper Adams would like to have a town centre site, because being stuck out there is perhaps, don't wish to be rude to that part of Shropshire, but is perhaps not the best experience for young students, and maybe they want to have a town centre site, and would that make sense?
In terms of the graduate one, there's been various funded courses over the past 3 years to support graduates as specific cohorts in terms of helping them into employment. I think this year the Kickstart scheme has supported graduates move into employment. It's offered opportunities to people within industries and sectors that just wouldn't have been available to them before. So a huge amount of money has gone into that locally. I can see again people in the room who've supported us in creating jobs in that, and we've had a huge amount of success with it locally in Shropshire. But I think graduates and graduate support will be something that will be looked at, and again funding will be put aside to support in graduates, like I said, in groups of cohorts and with routeways forwards.
Yeah, and I think it's also useful in relation to respond to the point that you've made. In our previous group, we also talked about the missing group, if you like, that 24 to 55, and to not forget that group, because it's that group that you're partly referring to, but it's that group that may need reskill, upskill, retrofit, to sort of coin a phrase there, into the roles that are available in the county. So from a skills perspective, a skills provider's perspective, how do we enable that to happen? Because they're the individuals that, from an economic perspective, we want to stay in the county, because they're actually contributing in a different way to the students would. But they plan to stay because they've chosen to bring their families. So the very much were sort of termed as forgotten in the previous group, but we shouldn't forget, in terms of skills at least, that particular group of people. Sorry.
Forgive me jumping in here, sorry, just before you go, but there's a relevant question here that's just come from the streaming audience, which I think follows on perfectly from the debate here. Sorry to jump in, from Paul, who says, with regard to your question too, are we not talking about Shropshire just having an image problem, and that it's not what is available in the county, it's what people think is not available in the county, because it has a reputation for having an older than average population, and for years and years you've heard parents and grandparents who've said they've had to leave Shropshire to go and pursue their dreams.
And the reason we're laughing, go on, Ben.
For Paul who's put that question in, that's been posed to us in the other room.
Yeah.
And for people who've lived and worked in Shropshire, it's something that you will probably recognise as a key challenge that we always face, that possibly it's a lovely place to come and stay.
Yeah.
But outside of that, there's lots of different questions to be answered.
Yeah, and as parents in the previous room, of parents of individuals at university, I think they see from through their children's eyes how attractive the county might be as a student. So they were sort of talking about how, as students, and this may be too much detail, but they used to go out every night, and they don't get the same sense of that in parts of Shropshire. And maybe that's where we started to then talk about the ecosystem. What is it that we're trying to achieve as a county? The types of individuals at what stage in their life? All of that. But yeah, it's what is attractive, and I think there was it's sort of the place, the brand of the place, I think was where we sort of got to in the previous room. Sorry, you've now got the mic.
And it's not a really significant point, unfortunately, but I was just interested, you were saying 2-year leading to tell me precisely, what the requirements are. I work for Shropshire Council, I look after a digital programme, predominantly around the rollout of digital technology, so whether that's mobile technology or whether that's fixed wire technology or whether that's full fibre technology. And I think it's really tricky in the world that we're in at the moment to think 2 years ahead. I mean, particularly around 5G, there's a whole evolution that's happening with skills particularly. Is what are those skills that will be required in 2 years' time? I think Mark Barrow touched upon it earlier this morning. You know, it's going to be a completely different skill set that's required. So I think there's a need for the sector to obviously be agile. There's got to be a generic base, but there's then got to be something that you're working on with the businesses, with the sectors, to be able to then adapt accordingly to meet those particular requirements. So, you know, I've had a number of conversations with some of those providers who are building infrastructure who can't get the skills. You know, if they want to get people to splice fibre and go out there and do some of that digital work, they have to send them over to Suffolk at the moment. So there's one place in the country at the moment. There's probably another one that's going to be set up, but there's real opportunity here if you work with the right sectors to develop some of those skills. And I think there's probably a little bit more work that we have to do collectively in guiding you, but also bringing some of that industry to you to tell you precisely, but thinking about that agile approach, because it's really difficult.
And absolutely. And from a skills provider's perspective, you know, we provide skills, but also education around that. So the degree isn't just about providing skills for a particular type of role. It's more rounded than that, and that's why it takes so long to get together. Whereas if we thought about an integrated skills provider ecosystem, you could have those dynamic, responsive, very much skills-oriented providers alongside those higher level skills, degree and masters and even PhD, which would be more university territory, that are mutually supportive. Universities aren't agile organisations, they just aren't built for that. But we absolutely recognise that there's a regional contribution we should be making to the economy. So how do we make that work, which is your point? How in such a responsive environment, how do we make sure that we are able to respond? Similar problem in terms of green skills.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm involved in the HiNet project. I don't know if any of you have heard about HiNet, but the Northwest is one of the first cluster sequencing application. And that's the skills deficit, the skills crisis there is not insignificant. But those organisations in that consortium need those skills now, not in 5 years' time. They need them right now. But again, they're not even in a position yet to articulate what they think those skills are going to be. So at the moment, we've looked at a gas engineer becoming a hydrogen engineer. Well, what does that mean? What is the difference in those skills that will be required between a gas engineer and a hydrogen engineer? Just as an example. But it requires all parts of that ecosystem, even though we don't recognise ourselves as an ecosystem yet, to be flexible, to be agile, to be able to respond. And that's problematic because we don't know what we're really responding to yet.
So just touching on that point, just a really quick one really. Those organisations are desperate for those skills.
Yeah.
So isn't the conversation with them to be doing collaborative courses together? So they come in, they start the work process, and then moving along to it, and potentially that's what we should be looking at across the board in Shropshire.
Absolutely. You know,
is moving across to that, because that's what we need. We need talent that's coming through and actually getting on the job experience.
Yeah.
I've recruited thousands of people. I used to work in university backgrounds and student unions, and we used to do a lot of development and training with our staff to make sure that when they were going out and finishing their degrees and getting the work done, that we were showing them how to get through those assessment centre processes, showing them how to do that things and getting them involved so they could do it. And that was just something we did as part of the business. So working with them together gets them more engaged and allows them to be involved in what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I think it needs to be, certainly in rural areas, it has to be this collaboration of two sets of skills working collaboratively.
Absolutely, the action needs to take place on a local level, and there needs to be engagement locally in terms of you're working with your local businesses to be able to identify your opportunities. The challenge then is accessing the funding and getting that commitment. You know, like the gent has just said there, for that particular industry, there's one training sector in the whole of Britain where you have to go to Suffolk. We're facing that with some of our green industry, and we're facing challenges in being able to get towards that funding, to be able to fund that training, to be able to have those people ready for those jobs of tomorrow. And I think, again, as a collaborative piece of work, that is there for us all to be part of.
Yeah, and does take a very mature approach from what, you know, is very much a commercial environment. So, you know, to act collaboratively but remain commercial and profitable, it is not easy, is it? It's not easy.
No.
Sorry, we're going to need to move on to
I'm
the next
conscious, guys,
question.
of the time, so
Yeah, but happy to hear your response
absolutely.
to that.
So last one. What one thing then would make a significant difference in improving skills and employment in Shropshire? You know, what are our thoughts of as a group? Lots of conversations of things we can do, things we'd like to put in place, things we'd like to change. But what is the one main thing we could do?
So do we think cost is the issue? Do we think there's a need for investment in skills? Because you know particularly
absolutely.
There's been a significant investment in skills. So is it in the right place? Is it at the right time? Is it at the right level? What is it that we can do to target that investment maybe?
So we were touching on this earlier before we started, and I think the big thing that a lot of people are finding is time.
Yeah.
So obviously the resources there, there's some massive companies here that have huge amounts of resources and it's not getting delivered in-house for them. You know, basic level, major companies like Tesco's, Asda's, those kind of things aren't ticking all their training boxes, aren't doing things because they physically
So we'll
haven't
be
got
paying a
capacity.
levy. So it may be that we're able to facilitate the level that they don't pay to come down their supply chain.
But then there's other things with that where it's about making those technologies smart. So I know a lot of companies have moved on to making them digital. So for your entry-level training and those kind of things, so they can be done off book, so you're not actually having to worry about it on the day in the work. It can be done after the fact. Someone can get those things in to make sure that all these boxes are ticked. And that should also be funded and paid for, because the other thing that tends to happen quite a lot with certain companies is they don't pay people for training, which is illegal. But, so they should be doing those things and they should be engaging with it. And why would you want to go and work for a company that's not going to do that? So I think the real key elements there is it's time as much as it is money, and people having enough time to invest that into the people and making sure that they can deliver it. And that's what engages people to want to stay and remain and work in the environment.
Yeah, and maybe coming back to your point, it's about understanding, those individuals understanding what it's like, particularly young people, because you could give young people skills, but it's those interpersonal skills particularly that need to be applied. And I don't think the pandemic's helped that.
No.
Just
I don't
basic
understand that.
communication skills.
They've lost a year of formative education.
Will be challenging, I think, for young people having the confidence to be able to do what you've described. I think it'll be really tough. It will be really tough. We've got 2 minutes, so please, come on. What are our significant difference? What are we going to make? What are we going to do?
At the risk of sounding boring, just going back to what I said before, which is that actually as businesses, we should be reaching out to our training providers, reaching out to FE, reaching out to work-based training providers and saying what we want. I think for too long businesses have been passive and expecting training providers to come to them. The only way that we will be able to create our employees of the future is by engaging with HEFE, work-based learning, to say what we need. And then the other issue is time, because for a lot of industries at the moment, they don't have enough staff, therefore they feel they can't release staff for training. So there is a unvirtuous circle at the moment, which we need to break. But I do think all of us in business have a responsibility to our own businesses and to our communities to reach out and to say to training providers, this is what we need.
I think it's a really good point, Mandy, because I think probably for many of our organisations' business, we've been very insular for many, many years. And actually what the pandemic has shown us is when we come together as groups, as task force, whatever it is, as a collaborative team, we can make change and plan change and put it in place. I think that's a really important point to take forward.
Yeah. So it looks like we've got a...
I've got, you know how when
Yeah,
I work
yeah,
out,
you
I've got
look.
something to say,
Yeah.
don't you? So, we've got one from Mark here who just says exactly this. He said, what needs to happen is that businesses need to realise that colleges, universities and further education organisations don't automatically know what they need. They need to feel that the door is open and that colleges want to engage with businesses and that they're the ones that need to be proactive, is what Mark says.
Yeah, which is a complementary point to yours. And absolutely, if we're all passive, nothing changes. Whereas if we're all active, at least we're involved in a conversation, aren't we? Even if we don't all agree about what should happen, which we probably wouldn't, but at least we're discussing it, at least something would happen as a result of that conversation. Just need the mic so people online can hear, that's all.
I suppose to that particular point is how do you make it easier for businesses to engage and have those conversations? Because I think that's the trick here, is how do you make yourselves more accessible and how quickly, going back to that agile point, can you actually engage and put a scheme together for businesses who may be growing very, very quickly and need that support to get the workforce trained and in place?
Yeah, and it's a difficult question because as a university, the major part of our funding, and it will be different for different universities, but our typical type of university, which is teaching focused, our income is from our student fees. So we have to make sure that those fees are utilised in such a way that our students get the most benefit from it. So it's how do we find the time and prioritise that work in order that we can then feed that back, that virtuous cycle that we've sort of spoken about. How do we find the time to enable that to happen? Because it's in our best interest to make it happen. But everybody needs to be proactive in that supply chain, don't they? And that I suppose is the challenge. How do we instigate a proactive, integrated supply chain of employment and skills?
Yeah, I would
because
just
that's not
echo
what
that.
we've not got that at the moment.
We don't, and as somebody who engages directly with employers most days, like Kirsty says, we have to make that a priority of ours. We have to find the time to do it, because if we don't take action today, we will end up with thousands and thousands of people with the wrong skills for the jobs that we have locally. So it has to be a priority of ours. We have to link our employers to our training providers, to our emerging sectors, to be able to feed our people in who have unfortunately lost their jobs, to retrain and reskill for those jobs that we're going to create for tomorrow.
Thank you. We're on to the coffee break. We will be around over coffee if you'd like to share any further thoughts, but please provide your feedback on the sheets provided. I think, is it red we decided?
I think is it the blue one?
The blue,
Yeah.
sorry. The blue sheet, if you're colourblind. So the blue sheet. So if there's anything that you feel like you wanted to say but didn't say, please make sure you pop it on that sheet for us so we can take that back and discuss later. So thank you for your time.